Hello and welcome back. In this video, we are going to be covering how to create the foundational quilt blocks for the Scrap Yarn Crochet Hoodie pattern. The main patchwork piece that is used in the Scrap Yarn Hoodie is a crochet diamond made with single crochet stitches. And we're also going to cover a slightly modified version that you'll see in two instances on the edge of the sleeve and at the hem of the body. And if you're just finding this video and wondering what is this Scrap Yarn Hoodie that we're talking about, I'll link the intro video below so you can hop back and take a look. There are going to be key moments in the bottom of this video in case you need to jump around, as this is going to be a true tutorial format. The main patchwork piece in this crochet hoodie is a crochet diamond created by doing an even 1 crochet increase per row for 10 rows and then doing 10 rows with a 1 stitch decrease. The entire sweater is just made up of these diamonds sewn or joined together in different ways. Now, I personally think the first 2 rows deceptively are the hardest of this pattern, but I'll let you be the judge. And don't forget, all of these steps are written down in full detail in the pattern as well. So that's a great thing to have open next to you to follow along as you're doing each of these rows. So the yarn that I'm going to use is single-stranded just so you can see what I'm doing. As we discussed in the previous video about yarn combining, this is a project that definitely is great for using up all of your scraps. I highly recommend stranding things together, but just for the purpose of seeing the stitches, I'm going to use this yarn that I popped in my yarn calculator to see what its weight was. And it's just a little bit on the chunky side. So we'll see if it crochets up as nice as I think it might. The first thing that we're going to do is a slip knot to get started. And we are going to be using a 5mm hook. We start off with a chain of 2. And like I said, I think the first 2 rows are the hardest from an orientation perspective. So I like to hold my foundational slip stitch here between these 2 fingers so I can just keep track of where I am. Then for our first row, we are going to single crochet in this very first chain here. And then every row at the end, we're going to chain 1 to turn it. That's the first row. The second row, we are going to do 2 single crochets in the first single crochet stitch here, then chain 1 to turn. So we're going to do 1, and then in that same stitch, we're going to do 2, and then we're going to chain 1 and turn. So now we have done our first 2 rows there. So we're going to begin our increase pattern from this point out, which is in the last single crochet of each row, we are going to do 2 stitches within that same stitch. So we just did that in the previous row, but we're going to start our third row with 1 single crochet in that first stitch, and then 2 single crochets in that second stitch. And then chain 1 and turn. Now you can see all of the spaces between our single crochets that we've now created, and you're going to start to see that we have increased by 1 each time. So we just did the row 3 and there are 3 stitches, but there's a really easy way to keep track of where you are, which is just to count your single crochets as you go. So we're going to go 1 single crochet, 2, and then this is my last space, so I'm going to do 2 in this one to increase. That makes 3 and 4. Chain 1 and turn. So this is really strandy yarn. As you can see, not the clearest example. We'll do the second one in something that's a little bit easier. We're going to keep doing that same increase pattern of a single crochet in each stitch and 2 in the last one to form that increase of a single crochet increase every row until we hit 10. So let's keep going. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chain turn, 1, 2, 3, 4 single crochets, 5, and one more in there to turn, 6, and then turn. And you can see we're starting to form this really nice diamond, but it's very hard to see at the beginning there. So that's why, again, I think kind of keeping that orientation is important. We'll keep going. As you get wider, seeing this very first stitch gets a little bit harder. So just make sure for the increase piece, we are going in this very first stitch here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, chain 1, turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then one more in the same space, 8, chain 1 to turn, second to last one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, chain to turn, and now we're going to do our last increase row to hit 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Chain to turn. Okay, so that is the first half of your diamond. So it should be a nice, lovely little shape there. So we have increased by 1 single crochet stitch each row, and now we're ready to start the second half. For our second half, we are going to start decreasing by a single stitch every row so that it reflects this same increase every single row. We did our increase on this first half on the last stitch, and we're actually going to do our decrease on the first stitch. So the way we're doing that, we've already done our chain to turn, so we're starting row 11, is we skip that very first stitch and go in this second one right here and do our single crochet. And again, really helpful to count. So there's 1, then keep single crocheting across all the way. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So that was 1 less than our previous row, chain 1 to turn. And now we have done our first decrease row here where we did our first decrease on that first stitch. So I've already chained 1 to turn. Now we're going to skip this first one. That's our decrease, and go here and start counting. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chain 1 to turn. You can see we're starting to get these nice tapered sides in here. And it's going to start getting really narrow here really quick. So skipping 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Chain 1 to turn. Skipping, going 1, 2, 3, 4. Chain 1 to turn. We're getting to the end here. So just keep that in mind. You skip that first one. 1, 2, 3. Chain 1 to turn. Now we only have 3 spaces here. So we're going to skip this one. So there's only 2 stitches here to make. So there's 1, 2, chain to turn. And now if you look, this is a little bit tricky. There's your first one, there's your second one. We only have 1 to do here. To our last single crochet. I'm going to do our last single crochet here. We're going to chain, and then I'm just going to clip this guy. And this is going to go through, and we are tied off, and we are done. And what you should be able to do to test that it is the right shape is you should be able to fold this guy in half, and you should get a nice little triangle here. I'm eyeballing this, and I'm thinking that this yarn looks a little bit chunky for our gauge. And sure enough, if I hold it up here, it's a little bit big, which I was a little worried about when I started using it. Also, it's so strandy that I had to keep it a little bit looser in order to not catch those strands. Good example to actually see the stitches. Not great if we're trying to get the right size for our project. So that is our first crochet diamond. We're going to go through it beginning to end together one more time. And ooh, I think this one is a lot better. It says it's a chunky, but when I'm looking at it compared to this is a lot thinner, actually. So let's run our yarn calculator quickly to see if it is slightly smaller. Yeah, so this says it's a chunky and recommends a 6-7, but when I pop it into the calculator, it is a worsted yarn. It's not a bulky. So this one's actually going to be perfect. So we're going to do our next one with this. If you're doing your first attempt at the crochet diamond, feel free to just scroll back and try that first one along with me again. And remember, there are speed buttons down here. So if you want this at half speed or you want this a little bit faster, you can just adjust that at whatever point you need to in order to make sure you can follow along. So we're going to start again with our slip knot. We are going to chain 2. And then we are going to go back into that first chain, do a single crochet, chain 1, turn. Since this is our first stitch, we are going to do that increase. Since our first stitch, it's also our last stitch. So we do our 2 single crochets in there. Single crochet there. And then we're going to do 2 single crochets in the next stitch. Chain 1 to turn. 1, 2, and then 2 single crochets. Chain 1 to turn. I'm realizing as I do this that I'm not the most experienced at speaking while crocheting. It feels a little bit like patting my head and rubbing my stomach a little bit. Even though I love to crochet while like watching TV and doing other things, I'm not the best at kind of narrating, so something I need to work on here. Okay, where are we? So we're still doing increases. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're doing our last 2 for 5 and 6 in that last stitch. Chain 1 to turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, oop, 5, 6, and 7. As you are going through and doing these, you'll start to kind of get a hang for once you've done like the first 2 rows, you really won't need to start counting until you get closer to the middle and you'll start to see it. For me, it's usually about 8. I suddenly am like, oh, I'm almost there. So I'll start counting. So see, I've kind of lost count here. You could count your stitches, but I find it's just easier to kind of count as you go. So chain 1 to turn, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, last one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I should be at 8 with 1 stitch left to go because I put my last 2 stitches for an increase in there. And we're halfway, chain 1 to turn, so you just don't forget. Let's take a look, as I said in the previous video, at how our gauges are lining up. Yeah, so this one's a lot smaller here. So if you were concerned with your gauge, this would be a good time to check. That's pretty darn close with this one. So now, again, we start our decreases. We're going to, again, skip the first stitch and go into the next one, and we should have 9 across now. So there's 1, 2 single crochets, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, chain to turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, chain 1 to turn there. And then this is the point at which kind of I'll begin to lose count again, because you just, as long as you know you're skipping that first one and doing a decrease, you're just gonna keep going until it starts to get pretty small, because again, that last stitch gets a little bit tricky. I'm definitely bounce your yarn all over the place while you're working, kind of a person. That is how I keep my tension loose. Just kind of let it just hang out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're getting smaller here. Skip that first one. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Chain 1 to turn. There should be 3 single crochets left. Skip. 1, 2, 3. Skip this first one. 1 single crochet. 2 single crochets. Chain 1. Turn. Okay, I only have 2 here. We'll skip the first one. Go into that second one. And then we can pull it through and be done. Let's give it a little snip. This is looking a lot better from a size perspective. We have now done our full crochet diamond, and it's a pretty basic stitch and piece to do. Again, you're just doing single crochets and chains. 2 frequently asked questions before we move on to the slightly modified diamonds that we'll use on our sleeves and the hem of the body. The first is there a right side to the diamonds? So no, there isn't a right side. However, knowing what side you want to be up does matter when we start seaming these together. I always kind of feel like one of the sides has a little bit more of a ridge to it, even though that really shouldn't be the case at all since each side switches directions, but it doesn't matter. Both sides are the same. Both sides can be up. It's not going to affect your work at all. The second question, how do you know the diamond is the right size as you're doing this? If you are using the Scrap Yarn Hoodie pattern, there is a physical piece of paper you can print out to scale to show exactly what the right gauge should be for the diamond. You can just lay it on top of that piece of paper and find out if you are spot on or not. If you go, oh no, I've combined the yarn, I'm not sure if it's the right size or not, or if I'm going to end up with something that's too big or too small, then I would recommend hopping back a video to the Yarn Math yarn combining, where I show you how to use and find the yarn combining calculator, which is going to tell you if your yarn is the right size or not, and if together they're going to be the right size, which is really important. As you get used to doing the diamonds, your diamond size might change too as you get more comfortable. It might get a little bit tighter, might get a little bit looser. And again, that's okay. That little bit of variation will go away when you're doing the seaming process of the whole thing, but something to pay attention to. And if there's any way I can answer any questions, of course, just leave them for me in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Next, we are going to walk through the cuff and hem diamonds, which are just slight variations on the main pattern diamond that we just did, but they serve a slightly different purpose and as a result are a slightly different shape. The function of these pieces on the broader garment is to take the spaces between our normal diamonds and bring them together so that we can form a cuff and a hem on the body of the Scrap Yarn Hoodie. By bringing them in, that then allows us to attach a lovely ribbed finish if we choose, which will be in the next section after this one. This way, the design itself helps achieve the fit that we're looking for. And not to worry, the increases and decreases that we are going to be doing are exactly the same as the ones that we just did in the main diamond, but the numbers and arrangement will be slightly different. The resulting piece should be a slightly narrower diamond that looks like it had the tip cut off, with the full piece and number of rows measuring exactly half the length of the main diamond. So let's get started. We are going to use some of our scrap yarn in this example. Since we're getting used to that diamond shape, again, it's going to be all single crochets. So we should be able to mix it up a little bit with the yarn that we're using in order to get familiar with what it looks like when you're stranding these together. As I did in the very last section, I'm going to first walk through this very slowly. Feel free to adjust the speed below, and then we're going to go through it a little bit more at speed to encourage you to follow along. And again, the instructions for this and the previous diamond are written down in full detail in the Scrap Yarn Hoodie pattern itself, which is linked below. We begin in the same way as the main diamond with a little slip knot on our hook. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to chain 2, and then we're going to do our first single crochet in the first chain, finish with a chain, and turn. Okay. Now we're going to begin our increases. So we are going to do 2 single crochets in that first stitch there. Oh, make sure I'm grabbing both of my yarns there. And then I'm going to chain 1 and turn. Again, this is the hardest spot right here, is seeing that you have 2 single crochets there. So don't forget about that. So there's the first one. And then there's the second one. It's a little bit on a curve, but we need to do 2 single crochets in that second stitch. Chain 1 and turn. We're going to keep doing that. 1, 2, same pattern as before, 2 single crochets in the last stitch to increase. Chain 1 to turn, and then we'll keep doing our pattern of a single crochet in each stitch. There's 2, 3, and then 2 in the last stitch to form that increase until we hit 8 this time. Chain 1 to turn. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, chain 1 to turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which means this last one is our last increase for this version of the diamond. Chain 1 to turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Since it's our last row, these last 2 should bring us to 8. 7 and 8. Okay. Chain 1 to turn. Now we're actually going to begin our decrease early. So it's going to be a narrower diamond since we only did the 8. And then we are going to skip this first one and then start the decrease by doing the single crochet in the next stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, chain 1 to turn, 1, skipping that first one, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that is actually the end of it right there. It's just this little petite diamond, and then it comes in. And then the way that this works is when we're joining this to our regular diamonds, this should measure exactly half the length here, but by fitting them in between, it then squeezes everything together and makes a really nice little cuff. So that is that one. Let's do one more, starting with our slip knot, chaining 2, going back in that first chain to start our single crochet. Chain 1 turn, starting our increase by doing 2 single crochets in that first stitch. Oh, I really like these colors. Chain 1 turn, 1 single crochet in the first one, 2 in the next one. Now, one of the things once you start stranding the yarns together, single crochet and single crochet, chain 1, turn. Okay, so now we're going up to 8. So we're going to do that. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3. There's a yarn store not too far away from where I live that makes these really fun, they're called like sour balls. They're supposed to be like crazy yarn balls, but their like factory isn't too far away. So I've gone with some friends to get yarn there, and they have some like closeout packages and stuff. And I've gotten some of these fun little color changing ones that are really nice to do little scrap yarn projects with, I think, to strand with other things, because they do change color over time. So you get nice kind of smooth color change, which is just keeps things interesting, because you kind of don't know how it's gonna change. Okay, so I want to count here, just make sure I know where I am. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I'm at 8. Of course I am. Okay. 7. Like I said, you just get used to when you need to count. Okay, we're at 8, which means we now need to do our decrease. So chain 1 to turn. We're going to skip this first one and hop in here. Oh, what does this color remind you of? It's getting a little bit more rainbowy. I wasn't really expecting that. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, okay. Keep your yarn away from your other yarn so it doesn't start felting together. Or I have a cat that loves to felt yarn. Just give it a little snip, pull it through, and we are done. And there you have your sleeve. So how do we join these together in order to get that great shape that we're looking for? And how do we join them to these diamonds in order to make the hoodie? We'll hop over to the next section, how to join these diamonds together to form your scrap yarn hoodie, and how to utilize these lovely little diamond ends that you just made in order to create some pretty amazing shapes. See you there.